Hello there, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. I'm here with Oscar Becher from Vinegar Syndrome, who is somebody that is going to be most important for what they are working on as their mission moving forward. Oscar, thank you for doing this for us.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me. I'm very pumped to do this. I've liked many of the interviews that I've seen, so I'm excited to be a small part of the trajectory of your entire the entire disconnected world. So,
I
yeah,
appreciate that. This is kind of a full circle moment for me because a lot of what I try to push for is an emphasis on why archiving is so important. And I think before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of this, some of the most important things that we can do is literally to define that. So for you, what does archiving mean?
yeah, yeah. So that's a very very good question. I must say there are a lot of I'm like a small part of an enormous field. There are many people who I think would be more apt, more perfect to talk about this. For me, archiving is a mixture of film conservation, preservation, and access. So, film conservation, protecting those original materials, making sure the most closest to the actual in camera negative or positive if it was shot in reversal is protected. Preservation is making sure that enough copies are made so that it can be disseminated and kept alive for future generations. Things get lost if you only have a few copies.
Right.
And then on top of that, the access thing, like providing the best quality actual copies of these materials. So basically, our mission statement is basically sending things out to everybody else who likes watching our movies on Blu-ray, DVD, everything like that. So for the last 10 years, that's kind of been, everything is kind of funneled into that. And and then the film archive has grown out of that too. So just expanding all these different realms and connecting them all together. But this is a really good question. And archiving is just, I don't know, it's constantly changing, right? Where basically I think people who have digitally made content or are keeping their documents, that's also an archive in and of itself too. It's not like completely relegated to a physical space. You can have digital realms of archives. The major issue is when we conflate making very accessible, low resolution or low quality copies, and then the original gets lost. So for me, archiving is about making sure that best version of that actual material in what format it was first constructed, perceived in, is survived. So I'm very film centric, so I'm very swayed back to the actual reels itself. But that's kind of basic gist of it, I think.
One aspect of archiving that people tend to take for granted quite often is literally that last one, which is access. And they kind of don't view that as a process. It sounds like to me, a lot of people just think, let's, shove this in a vault, and as long as it's safe, then it's archived. That's all that matters. But I mean, that access is a really big, important part for this, because if you're not even allowed to consume it in any way, what is there really a point to it for a lot of people? So
this is a very good question. Yeah, I mean, very tricky because everything that I work on, there are a lot of like weird counters to that too, which is like there are a lot of films like I know Amy Heller and Dennis Doros. You've probably seen like in 2022 they did this Missing Movies whole like nonprofit, which is a really great initiative where basically it's to, I guess the definition is to make forms of legally accessible form, something that doesn't exist in a legally accessible form, something that may only exist on VHS or some old out of print Blu-ray or DVD or something like that. Those kind of become missing. You don't know where the elements are. But for us, I guess, archivists and preservationists, the weird crux of it is like a lot of these materials you kind of have to preserve them or conserve them first, so that hopefully, I consistently think obviously access is always going to be the end goal, and making sure it stays in this zeitgeist of like us being able to view it, have conversations about it, determine whether it's good or bad. That's a little bit out of my range, but I think the biggest thing is uh, it's tricky because I'm in this very insular world where I'm always trying to save the original materials first, either contacting the original filmmakers, seeing what they want to do with it, if they want it to go to another archive. Maybe there's a possibility of us putting it out, but there's a wide gamut of these tricky things. I think putting it on a shelf in a vault, I'd list as pretty high on my list of this is a good thing to do versus maybe putting in a storage locker, where basically ownership is a fleeting, tiny little if you miss a few payments, it's lost. It's going to go for auction. And this has happened multiple times over the course of my tenure here, where basically it's horrifying. But the good news is when crazy film people see film cans or film reels, they contact other crazy film people. But yeah, I don't know. The vaulting, I think, is a really good first step. I'll say that. Where it's I never consider it the end all, but I completely agree with you. Access is truly the most important facet of this end goal, where even if we can write about it, if researchers can have access to it, we provide access to things. If we talk about, I'll talk about things with other preservationists or film researchers, and they'll say, "Oh, how do I get a copy of that?" I'm like, "I got you. Come by the archive. I'll give you a hard drive or something." So I don't know, little things like that, but it's very insular. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you think? I don't know. I'm interested in hearing an expansion. Sorry to switch it around, but.
Well, one of the things that I think on this, which is very, I guess maybe a philosophical problem, is that this, at the heart of it, is really a delicate balance. Because when you have Vinegar Syndrome, when you have Severin, when you have even somebody like Shout Factory that is doing a lot of restorations on very popular films that you would think are being taken care of properly, they're not always being taken care of properly, but they have to have a way to pay for all of this. There's not a lot of people that are sitting here just forking over millions to say, Oscar, make the world's best film archive so that we can keep all of these pieces of art alive for as long as humanity allows. We have to make money to do this. And I get that. But then that you have all of the armchair experts that are going to come out and say, well, why are we releasing this film instead of the films I love? Or why are we releasing this film that I think is a bad film? When in all reality, there are 10 million people out there that saw this when they were in their teens and they love this movie and it's one of their favorites ever. It's such a weird juggling act of taste, of amount that you can charge people, of rights. I mean, rights is such a huge part of it. But at the end, it feels like, in a way, nobody wins, no matter what you do.
Yeah. I mean, even on from our perspective here, where it's I think one of the most recent examples of a situation like this, where it's I think very recently, Fatal Games. Fatal Games was one of these really sought after titles everybody wanted to release.
Right.
And then we finally found preprint material for it. I believe it's from France. I think France. But basically, it was a dupe neg. And the truth of the matter is, great fucking movie. I love seeing impalements.
Right.
Impalement is always much appreciated in my book, especially done well.
Especially by Javelin, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think, it's all about elements too, where it's for some reason someone wasn't caring for the original materials. We had to get the closest element to that original, and ended up just the picture quality is miles better probably than pulling from a print, but still there's a little bit of dupiness. You can see a little bit of the actual texture of the film, which I think is a positive too, because as an educational facet, you get to see a really cool film, best it's ever going to look. You're never going to see it any better than this. Really great movie, very cool movie. but you're also seeing the limitations of I don't know, film collectorship, I guess, where you can keep the best thing that you can possibly have, and you can only pull so much out of it. But I highly recommend that release because I think it's very educational. Sometimes a little sad. There's sad parts of this kind of thing too, where it's like, I wish someone had kept the
Right.
it was a long time ago, but yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a balancing act. I agree with you, and I don't know. There's so many things that I wish we could put out, and we're trying to figure out avenues of actually putting them out. But it's going to be a long time before, number one, it's like elements first. If we have a print of something which is the coolest thing that anybody's ever thought of ever, that's just again putting it on the shelves, putting it in our database, having Lindsay go through the entire process of like scanning documents related to that and applying metadata and all the great work that they do. But basically, that's like a first step. The second step, rights, is such an enormous hurdle. A lot of these fucking movies, which
Right.
I'm like, And I think archives are also dealing with that, which is kind of why a great portion of nonprofits have this enormous focus on silent films. A lot of these movies are public domain, and that allows them to kind of bypass that second stage, which is so infuriating to anybody who's a professional in this field. You can go pretty much from vault to preservation, which is like, I don't know, that's kind of the end goal. We're kind of, by going through 70s and 80s, it gets a little tricky, So, I don't know. Yeah, no, so, yeah, it's a very complicated issue. So I'm glad we brought that up. Yeah, I'm not just shelving things forever. Bring it all. We're gonna bring it all eventually. Yeah. Or
Speaking of complicated, can you tell us why this was so complicated? Because,
well, I just got shivers. Yeah, I got what's it called? Like goosebumps. Yeah, that. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
This is a Herculean task here, and I've been a little, what's the best way to say this? Dismayed at some of the reactions to this box set online, and there's been so many things leading up to this moment. Vinegar Syndrome giving their mission on, wearing it on their sleeve, literally for a decade, and then they had a year where a lot of the films they put out were super mainstream, very popular compared to what they'd done previously. And then that roped some people in, and then they see something like this and they go, oh, well, what is this shit? Everybody watches one film of this and then they put it back on their shelf or they sell it. And it's like, okay, cool, but also this is a giant deal and something that doesn't ever happen.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've really been very, very proud of this. I think, there's so many people at this company who've had an enormous amount of work on this particular project, and then that's why it's such a perfect Vinegar Syndrome release. I think, it's in terms of locating elements. It's like people like Bob Murawski or Sean Savage at the Academy, or Snelson at Library of Congress. Many F.W. Murnau, Stiftung. These were all people who helped in large part find films. In addition to people here like Stephen Morowitz, District Picks with Red Midnight. I think there's this Herculean, as you already said, the Sisyphean task of winding through films, trying to find stuff which is in old rusty fucking cans, and half the fucking time, you pull something out and you're like, oh, I think I know where the original exists for this interpositive or something like that, and make a cool release. But we kind of, the dream situation is when we can find something really cool in the best possible element that exists in the world.
Right.
And everything on that set, I think the coolest thing is I've always liked the idea of film archiving as someone holding the hands over your eyes and then kind of saying, check it out. Look what we have here. We found this. Everybody thought it was gone. Or alternatively, no one knew this existed for some of this stuff. Like people knew that like rare blue apes existed, but I don't think like when we found when we first went through, like Stephen was the one who discovered Red Midnight, but it kind of sent electricity throughout the entire thing. We had 9 films, and we wanted one which was kind of like, I think half of it was curating the entire thing. Like Joe
Right.
does a good portion. Joe's like the acquisitions and like major curatorial mind at VS. And every single time I would find something, he's like, no. We need something more exciting. We need something like that. So when we had these 9 lined up, it kind of sent these shockwaves throughout the entire company, because it was just like, not only was it under our roof, it looked really good. It was a blow up from 16. It was shot on 16. But like little discoveries like that, and curated discoveries, I think are really, really important. And things that people really don't take a lot of risks on, you know,
Right.
rightfully so in many cases, because like, you know, I think the cool thing about the set too is I think everybody will maybe like in the first viewing or first discussion, like we'll maybe like two movies or 3 movies, and then on the rewatch, you'll like this one a little bit more too, and then another one will kind of, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm not really remembering that. But after watching all these movies so many times, thinking about them for so often, everyone hits like a really important factor of lost films, like whether or not like something is lost and sought after, like Violated, or deep inside the Joe Sarno movie. Like these are movies that people have kind of wanted to see. Beware the Black Widow. Like there are quite a few people who are like fervent obsessives about this movie. So it was enormous. And then rights in addition to that for a lot of these are really cool. But you know, we started with the lost films of Herschel Gordon Lewis. You know, it kind of set the, you know, the template. So I love the big releases too, and they bring a lot of like, I think people care about film and the many different forms that it actually takes. And lost films are sometimes very like hidden behind this actual curtain of like,
Yeah.
it's lost for a reason. No one liked it. No one thought it was interesting. But I think one thing that I think made this a really good release is that it makes the counter case, which is like these were lost because the right people weren't there at that time to care about them. And now,
Yep.
hopefully, my favorite part now about the release too is I love seeing this shared experience aspect of it, which is kind of similar to me as the like watching a movie in theaters,
Yep.
where you can kind of hear people's laughs. You can hear like people say, "Oh, this movie sucks," and then I'm like, "Oh no, Barbara's really good." Like it has a lot of cool references. Like Barbara is a movie which like literally has a reference to Cleopatra. Theda Barrow's Cleopatra from 1917, one of the most famous lost films. It's a
Yep.
lost film within a lost film. You can't write this stuff. It's really cool. So getting to actually, I think the cool thing about it is kind of everybody gets to experience them for the first time, and like you know, just discussing their first reactions, because that's what a lost film is. It's not valuable until it's found and
Yeah.
experienced. It ties back into the access thing perfectly. So yeah, great. Yeah. I think enormous. Did sorry. Sometimes I get bored of hearing myself talk often, but did you get through all of them? What was your thoughts?
I am a very, very busy person, so I've not seen all of them. I've seen a couple. But really, one thing I want to say before we walk away from this release in particular, I really think Elijah Drenner's documentary is one of the most important things that have ever been made for this field. And I try to say that and not sound high and mighty with it or exaggerating. It is genuinely one of the most important things I think that have ever been made for this field. And if it expands beyond this, I really feel like a lot more people could feel like the mission behind home video, perhaps, if they actually take a look at it. How do you feel about the documentary? Anything you feel like it's missing? Anything you want to sing praises about it?
I mean, I can only sing praises of Elijah, because I think Yeah, when the first discussions about the whole set, I think that was one of the first things which was brought up, like what his vision was going to be for this, and like, you know, Elijah was the first one to say it. He's like, I'm a little bit of an outsider to this realm, but he's not. Like
Right,
he's
right.
been in this world for like way longer than I have,
Forever.
and he knows so much about this actual field, and is one of those other people who's just like super humble and dealt with my diva-ness when it came to like hey, can we come over? He's like, can we do? I want to do my interview in the film archive, and he's like, no, we don't have to. We have the film archive very represented. I'm like, I want to do a film with my work, you know. So yeah, I really thought the documentary is one of the. I was really like super happy with how it turned out, and it really like showcased everything. You know, we have like beyond just like uh, Dave and Brandon and Ryan and Curtis, the people in restoration who do like this immense, incredible undertaking for every single one of these films, care about them all,
Right.
and know these films better. Like imagine like knowing a film so much that you're just like that freckle there. It's awful. You
Yeah.
know, they know it like so fucking well. But in addition to that, the people who work in shipping, like Jenny and like Eric and all these people being represented too. That's an enormous part of distribution too, where these are people, and every single one of those people as well. I think that was one of my favorite of his additions to this, where you'd think that this is just about the people who are like touching the film. No, it's literally about the people who are like they're all film experts down there.
Right.
If you have a conversation with any of them who are trying to get everybody their like um, their orders, Evie included. Evie, my favorite person, when I'm not shipping something, because then she gets irritated with me. But basically, yeah, those are the people who like make sure that final end goal is reached, that final access. It's like the access arm of VS. So I really like the documentary. I think it really turned out well, and the interviews are really great. I think Bob Murawski had really great moments, and like I really like David Gregory's sequences. Uh, yeah, and I did the interview for it with Joe and Ryan, the owners of VS, which was very. That was my idea, where I basically just like I had. There's some funny outtakes because I wrote all the questions on my arm, and I showed it to the camera. Um, but yeah, so that was really cool seeing them on screen together because they're to me and Ralph is the other owner. Where basically all these people come together to kind of make a really like crazy thing happen where every single film restoration is such an undertaking, but
Right.
imagine doing 10 of things that no one after they come out everyone's going to be like that movie sucked. But I think the actual doc I think does a really great like and tells a really great story of how you know in this whatever you want to call it this boutique realm in which we live in for distribution like there are a lot of people doing really good work, and once again not just VS, it's like it's so many different people.
There's so many.
I hope they keep doing this, and I hope they keep taking risks. I've found like 3 more lost films since like in the week or two after the release came out. I'm like, oh, no, it's perfect. It's perfect. Next one, hopefully that'd be so sick. But yeah, I agree. I completely fucking agree with you. Elijah did a really great job.
Well, I'm gonna try to speak something into existence here, and bear with me for a moment because I know this is not a unique idea, but I want to see if you agree. I really think one of the aspects of the documentary that I think is so, I guess, like personal to the consumer is that they can see the entire process and feel sort of invested in the end game, along with you, along with Ryan, along with everybody in the process. I would love to see, Fatal Games. How about a 5-minute documentary in Fatal Games, literally 5 minutes, from Oscar receiving in the film to scanning it to what it looks like, to this is why we're going through the process, and now you're watching it on this disc, actual pictures of the film when it comes in. Just a little special feature on every release that deserves it. Obviously, there's some that you're using a shared scan from Italy that's somehow in pristine condition. That probably doesn't need a 5-minute documentary. But something like Fatal Games, that it was an actual undertaking, hell yeah, put that on the disc and make everybody invested in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to say you're a prophet, but like we're working on it. I think. I think come January there'll be something which will kind of like, where this is. I've been trying. I've been trying to like bring. I think this is one of the things that I'm really proud of, where I think I'm really trying to bring people a little bit closer to the film itself. I think, once again, with the vault over here, we have a crazy amount of film here. And oftentimes we throw out these like terms like interpositive, we throw out the term internegative, we throw out like, what is a fine-grained master? What is a reversal, cut reversal? What is a blow-up internet?
Yeah.
All of these terms. I think if you're not in this weird, really, really insular film world that we're in, like it's very difficult to feel that connection. So I've been really like, it's a task because I think it involves connecting multiple different sectors of the company. But I definitely think tying people more closely into like that actual process. I've been like, I hover when I go into the restoration office. I'm like, can I take some video for possibly a future thing when they're working on something. But I think I'm 100% in agreement, and this is something which is absolutely being worked on. I want people to feel really connected to the stories behind the films. I think that's what brought me into film history. It was like documentaries about how difficult it was to restore a film which was warped or water damaged or like partially lost because of a fire. They had to pull from multiple sources. I think all these types of things were things that kept me engaged in releases and distribution and archiving. So I don't know. That's a very important facet for me too. So I'm glad you said that. I don't know like how long you've had access to my emails, but please give it back to me. My password.
Yes, sir. Yeah. This is one of those things that obviously you are going to have immensely more knowledge than myself when we start talking about archiving and all of that. But I have to say, one of the biggest like aha moments I've had since doing all of this in the public eye, I guess, is fairly recently. It was literally just a couple months ago. There was a video posted online, which was from the Archivist Roundtable of Metropolitan New York. And you are giving a full-blown presentation on a lot of behind the scenes, how this works. And it's fair warning to everybody, if you're going to click on the link that I'm putting in the description below, very technical. But if you're nerdy like me, oh my God, was this like one of those brain-bursting moments of, okay, so there's so many terms in this that I've heard for years with home video and thought that I knew, but it's just skewed ever so slightly. I really think this presentation you did is one of, by far, like the best things just for people to grasp what goes into this, that people should just consume as a resource. Anything from that process or that presentation that you want to highlight specifically?
First of all, thank you. That's really nice. I feel like we're trying to do more of this, and I think it's like really worth noting that the film archive is largely run by not just me. It's also Lindsay, who's our digital asset manager, who's like an enormously knowledgeable, like one of a kind individual who's super knowledgeable about like adult film. Did her like master's thesis in pornographic material, and manages our database and backs up everything to multiple copies in the best possible digital methodologies and stuff like that. So beyond that, thank you again for saying that. I feel like we definitely should do more of that kind of stuff. Thank you for the plug. Some of the things which I think were brought up are, I think we have like, I think some of the more important things which I think can be gleaned from that are some of the terminologies between
Yes.
like restoration sources, possibly for like materials, the best case scenarios, and the worst case scenarios. Because I think a lot of our releases that are in our heads, like we want to see this on Blu-ray, and the truth of the matter is the source material that exists is so below quality that we're probably never going to see a UHD of something.
Right.
That if only a print exists, or if worst case scenario, a lot of like a work print is a very low quality restoration material. But yeah, certain things like if you ever see a release that has not even going into the digital realm, which is much more Lindsay's area. If you see something which has original materials on it, make sure you ask throw out a question to the distributor, because original materials is a very big vaguism. Ask if they're using the original camera negative. Ask if they're using the original reversal positive. If there's actually, if it's a cut element, it's pretty close to the original, maybe the best that actually exists. But there are a lot of intermediate formats, which also gets really complicated, where basically like internegative, you'd think, the question is like, everybody thinks that the moment you hear negative, that's better than else. Yeah, it's good to go. But the truth of the matter is, an internegative is a lower generation element than an interpositive. But it's very counter to what one would think.
Right.
But an interpositive is a pretty fucking good element for making a UHD from. Ideally, you'd want to, like, you can do so much more with the OCN in terms of like sharpness and clarity, but like an interpositive is a great source. But you'll very rarely see something which is like a UHD from an internegative, but sometimes people do that. And that is a very big conundrum for me as like a person who values this kind of stuff, where it's like, I feel like, I don't know, I'm not gonna like go into details about this any further, but I think it's very, very important for people to kind of know a little bit about what goes on their desk and be in communication with the people who are like actually making these works, because everybody here is an expert, and the best way to be an informed buyer is to be in communication with those who are actually putting the enormous amount of resources, expertise, and time into these releases. In addition to finding elements, which is a whole fucking thing in and of itself, it takes years to find certain things. Right. Fatal Games took so fucking long. But yeah, other things are like that were covered. And again, I say it in that I highly recommend, instead of just listening to me blather, I have like there's a PowerPoint. I have like a PowerPoint, which I never do. I'm very disorganized in terms of that kind of stuff. But I literally made an effort to kind of make everything very clear. I thought different types of film storage were also really interesting to me. I wish people would ask companies about that too. I'm just trying to like light the fires under other, like to see if like how other people are storing their films too. Like I think whenever you see a release which says the original material was provided by an archive, like Library of Congress or the Academy Film Archive or UCLA, you can like pretty much, and you're seeing a release of it, you can kind of say that's a preserved element. It's like a really, like if it's in an archive, it's in a film archive where basically they have resources, time, staff, and like multiple methods of making sure it doesn't get lost. Like you can be pretty sure that material is going to stay alive. And I think that's a really, really important facet of distribution going forward, where make sure the companies who are doing this, putting out films, in addition to releasing cool shit that we all want to see and finding cool shit, which is an enormous first step, that they're making sure these materials at least remain or go to places where it'll be cared for a longer period of time. So yeah, it's so tricky. There are a lot of things to consider, and then I think the one thing that people shouldn't look at is I have one frame of a film which I really want us to put out, where basically they shouldn't look at that, which is a South Asian science fiction movie, black and white, beautiful, original camera negative, but I think Reel 3 or something is completely water damaged. I don't think they ever made prints of it. So basically what you're kind of seeing is like a really sad case of like, this is the sad aspects of lost films. It's a really cool movie. Like has like fucking like people drinking blood, has a fucking alien with claw hands and like flamethrowers, and it's very cool. But there are like sad stories in archiving too, and I think we kind of went over that as well. Lots of incompleteness too. I think before we go on, like I think going back to the lost films question, I was looking recently at the Library of Congress, David Pierce, the 75%. It's often thrown around as the amount of lost films which are lost. Right. But that 5%, that extra 5% includes incomplete films, and incompleteness in elements is an enormous issue. Where basically we'll have, and then Modell talked about this too, where basically like making sure that something isn't just one reel of something isn't thrown out because you can't find the rest of it, or like, one reel isn't just in a storage locker not being cataloged. If it's in an archive or it's in a place where people have a dedicated catalog and a staff like me and Lindsay who are like able to kind of like provide a little insight into what our collection is, make sure that make sure you're supporting the companies who are really trying to put an effort into working with film archives and film professionals so that everything in the end, like that is incomplete as well, can actually be married, recombined, and put out for release, like Underpaint did. But I thank you for the plug again. Much appreciated. Very,
I mean, honestly, not even meant as a plug. This was one of those things that when you watch it, I felt like I was like snooping in on a secret meeting that I wasn't allowed to, and there was so much information that felt like I should be paying for it. It's that type of like educational experience that you get an actual like gained not just interest. I don't even know the right way to say this, but like. There's a personal investment that if you watch this and you already were even remotely attached to the idea of Film Archive or being interested in that side, you immediately go, well, holy shit, now I have a mission. I want to go down this path. And, maybe a good question to ask following that, and especially what you just said about supporting those companies that affiliate with archives. We never answer that question. We never say this publicly. What is the best way to support these archives? What is the best way to support these companies? Obviously, buying this release is a big deal, but how do we support the National Film Congress or whatever? There's lots of AGFA. Other than buying their releases, what else can we do to support them?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very good question. And going back to, I think. One of the things which is just like a very sad truth of this is like archiving for its entire purpose has kind of been seen as like what is that dragon in the Lord of the Rings, the Smaug. Yeah, where basically it's just like people who are looking over a pile of coins and just not in gatekeeping.
Yeah,
but an archivist are not like that at all. Every single one of us we care about these films, and oftentimes archivists are the only people who care about a certain title, a certain thing which doesn't exist anywhere else. In addition to what we do too, like a lot of adult movies were kind of like thrown by the wayside in terms of like archives, like in order to accept a larger collection, if it has to pass through a board in many nonprofits. So like even acquisitions is a very tricky thing. So that kind of definitely functions in our like what we get, because we have a very good connection with these archives. But supporting those releases, which obviously you already said, and honestly, just like getting connected with events that they do, trying to, like, I know it's, everybody has like a limited pool of resources, but if a lot of these institutions will do cool repertory screenings. If you see something that comes from an actual a print or restoration that comes from an actual film archive, or you know that this film archive has a preservation, a digitized version of something, like ask to screen it. Everybody can be a curator. Everybody can be a programmer. Contact your local theater. And obviously there's going to be costs involved in that, but it's costs which literally go towards paying staff. They literally go for conserving more materials, preserving more materials. Nothing here falls by the wayside. If it doesn't help us in this generation, it'll help future generations in 100 years when, like, who knows how much of this material will have decayed by then. So I don't know. It's a very good question. Every institution is different. UCLA Academy, they have very good, George Eastman Museum and Library of Congress, very, very good like theaters, like where basically they consistently try to show in the original format or as close to the original format. Try to see things on film as much as humanly possible, especially if it's like, if you talk to the programmers, say if it's a really good print or if it's a preservation print that was made for the purposes of exhibition, that's something which like advocates for archiving as well. I'm wearing my shirt today, which is my picture show. Go support like events and these kinds of things where you can like literally provide like resources to these institutions. These things take a really large amount of time, resources, cost, personal investment. And overall, the one true unlimited resource, which is like enthusiasm for film, where basically a lot of these people care about films that they want to talk about forever, you know? So if you go to these types of institutions, you can meet professionals who have been working to make sure these films are alive, and hopefully you can find a little tidbit of the actual film history that kind of ties you into the larger scape of film distribution, archiving, preservation. Because literally everybody can do this if they have the right mentality and mindset. It's just about making sure that we support the work that we really care about. You know, even if it's kind of a little bit outside of our, a lot of this work goes unnoticed because it's literally in a vault. In order to make sure the film material is safe, we have to keep it away from large swaths of people and the outside world, you know? So yeah, it's very tricky to like marry that balance, but support your local archives too. There are a lot of very small regional archives across America and the world who like literally they do fundraisers and stuff like that. Support them. They're saving home movies of like people from the 1930s, people from the 1940s. You'd never ever be able to see such beautiful if you know like Kodachrome film, they're beautiful like little insights into worlds which you've never even imagined being possible. And if you see something like that, I don't know, everybody can be connected to this. It's just about like which aspects of it like people find the most interesting, I suppose. But yeah, that's a really good question. For us, I guess, and for us, largely enough, I think I started with talking about, sorry to ramble so much.
No, it's good. It's all good info.
But thanks. But like sorry, I'm bad at compliments. But I think a big thing for us is like support the also get into the sex film titles, like the adult stuff too is really, really cool. And those are films which I don't give him many compliments because I think he can be a very difficult person. But Joe is truly the world's expert in sex films and pornographic media. He hates that term. And everything which is in our archive, like that's something that Joe is literally the expert in. He knows more about it than anybody else. And a good way of supporting us as an institution is kind of getting involved in the history of like censored cinema too, where basically all film was not always created equal. There are different exhibition methodologies. Some things were played on like jukeboxes. Like I have a Scopitone over there. My Scopitone, I bought it on an impulse buy. I'm stupid, but basically a lot of these like short form pornographic films were shown on jukeboxes. In Times Square in the 1970s and 80s. So like, I feel like that's a good way of supporting us. If you really like care about, supporting our like mission of trying to preserve films, those are really helpful for us because I think they're very difficult to market and difficult to bring to the consumer who's like, oh, ew, porn. But a lot of these stories behind the actual film itself are fucking fascinating. And like the stories of the people behind them and the people who like joined into this weird world, super equally interesting,
Yeah.
And explore subcultures of film history, I think is one of the big things, I think. So
Interesting. Many of these archives, and we've touched on it ever so slightly, but many of them are nonprofits, and nonprofits open up this whole different world of things that they're allowed to do and encouraged to do than the for-profit machines. And like AGFA is one of the easiest ones because they're in our world. So I'll throw out there. AGFA is somebody that you can set up as a smile.amazon.com donation. So when you go shop through Amazon, they'll get like 4% of all of your purchases. They don't charge you any extra. They just donate stuff to them. I know they do a couple fundraisers every year. But the big thing is a lot of these archives, and you've touched on this, they will give prints or send digital files to show at any theater. And no matter what you're paying them, and many of them are very cheap. AGFA, for example, you can rent out an entire theater and show a film that is in their archive. That's not just what they have on disc. They have rights to a shit ton of films. Mm-hmm. It's less than like $200 for most theaters, unless you're in New York City, which most of us are not.
Yeah. No, completely. Yeah. I mean, I think another part of this, absolutely. Like working with theaters is enormous. They're like, again, access. Keeping the theatrical viewing experience is like key to keeping film alive, I think. We love home media here. Obviously, it's like our bread and butter, but making sure that things stay in theaters as well is enormous. AGFA is an enormous part of that for us too. But basically, they help us out a lot. And they have so many prints too. Crazy amount of prints. But absolutely put.
I would love to be able to speak about all of this all day, but some of the things that people are going to want to know, like what made Oscar get into this? How were you a Indiana Jones fan as a kid, and suddenly you're interested in museum curation, and now archiving? How'd you get here?
Well, I contest what you say. I don't think anybody's interested in that.
I guarantee you, at least one person will comment that they were.
Okay. Well, then in that case, for that one person, I think from, I started watching movies very early, and then I would watch the really good movies, and I kind of didn't know what made them good. Like, I was a kid. My brain didn't work quite as good as the rest of these fucking people. So then I would just kind of like rewatch them over and over again, try to see like the best movies and see the worst movies, worst. And I think the thing that kind of kept drawing me towards everything else was the materiality of things. If I could see that something wasn't as good quality as something else, looking at different types of aesthetic qualities of different eras of films and different decades made me very interested in, I don't want to use terms like materiality because it does seem a little bit too pretentious, but I do think it is a big part of it. Where basically, if you can look at a screen and know that you're looking at a digital screen, which is a digital copy of something which exists in another form, you can kind of get a little bit closer to the material. So eventually I just tried to seek out as much information as humanly possible. Again, I also had difficulty finding information, wasn't tied to archives. Everything was behind that curtain. And then I just tried to get behind the curtain as much as possible. So I think, long story short, I went to a really great program, which I will advocate for always, L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation, where they kind of taught me how to actually handle materials. And I think from there on, I thought I was going to be a curator or like maybe work in like, I wanted to be like a film historian or something like that. And then when I started handling film more and more, I was just like, oh, this is the coolest thing. Every single time I touch film, I learn more, and I'm handling things which I never thought I would be able to handle. I'm working with people that like I always looked up to, like Anthony Labate, Deborah Stoiber, everybody there are like just brilliant fucking people. You know, I have a lot of heroes, I think, in this field, and I think a good portion of why I wanted to, I don't know, get deeper and deeper into it was kind of, you know, I feel like being involved in bringing something and removing that like smoke screen a little bit and showcasing, yeah, there's a digital copy, but this is a really good digital copy. You know, it's so good that you can actually see the limitations of the medium itself instead of just having a rip of something, of a VHS of a movie that was never really released internationally. Maybe it exists in someone's collection or something like that. Removing that as much as possible so people can see how film was originally actually exhibited and distributed. I think this is like a basic tenet of, I think, why I kind of got more and more invested and more interested. And I just also became really fascinated by the different materials of these things, you know. Everything is like, once you kind of start connecting everything to this like triacetate, which makes up vinegar, like our namesake. What namesake is made of, basically is used to make, what's it called? The screens on our TVs. You know, it's so, and it's used as well to make fucking t-shirts. You know, everything is tied together, and the world becomes much less obscured if you can connect it to things which are closer to you. So the moment I started realizing how close I was to all these materials, even though I didn't really think that I was that close, I was just watching stuff. Thankfully, no t-shirts are made of nitrocellulose, but still, the moment you kind of realize how close all of this material is to the actual just film obsessive person like I am, then that kind of draws you in more and more to, I think, this kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know, but everybody gets into it through different realms. I think what made you get closer and closer to film? When did you start watching movies?
Later than most, mostly near the end of my teenage years. I got close with a lot of bands. I was in the music scene for a little while. I was hosting people. I had a little tiny house that I was renting in the middle of the desert, and bands needed a place to stay because we lived in the middle of nowhere, and so they'd be driving in between shows, and they'd have hours to go, and it's super dangerous where I was living. I lived in California, about halfway between Vegas and LA, and so everywhere around there's bands that pass through there because it's some of the hottest places to play, but you're going through hours and hours of nothingness on the highway. So if they play a tiny show, I'd be like, hey, if you need a place to stay, and they're like, hell yeah. And so they'd stay there, and they'd be like, hey, you ever seen this movie? And because it was such a small town, all we had was all the super mainstream titles, and they'd be like, did you ever see Evil Dead 2? I'm like, is there an Evil Dead 1? What's that? And so yeah, I learned a lot back then, and just exploded. It was an interesting growing time, and there's still tons of big stuff that I've never seen, so I'm still learning.
Me too. I think yeah. I think yeah, and this is there are many things that I don't know anything about. There are things that I make mistakes on, very tiny little mistakes that because I'm just riffing or something like that. Where basically I'm learning things constantly. Where I'm just or I say something incorrectly because I'm not I'm like a professional in the field, but I'm not like a professional. You know, but I'm just not good at like the, you know, I say please and thank you and everything like that. But I'm a very weird, off kilter person. So it's like, you know, there are always things that I'm learning more and more from the professionals who I look up to, and the, like, you know, I don't know. We have a lot of like brilliant people here too, who I'm just like always in awe. I always go into like the restoration suite and just ask Ryan dumb questions. I'm just like, what do you think about this? Like, why don't we use this? And he's like, what? Oscar's here again. Let's try it. Let's try to explain some semblance of a very brilliant answer that I wouldn't be able to possibly understand without hands-on experience. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so it is very important for you to the sharing of films too.
Yeah.
Very.
Absolutely. And that access part is a huge part for me. And that's why I don't know, like a lot of people that are, I hate to use the term influencer. That's such a bullshit word. But the people that are talking about physical media or film online, a lot of them are either like vehemently anti-streaming or that's all they do. And like, I'm not against it. I think it should be there because people like this costs a lot of money. People can't just buy 1,000 releases a year and say, I'm doing my part, yay. They need to be able to have Tubi for free to be able to see some of these movies. Or the biggest thing, supporting local libraries who are still getting physical media in and, you know, offering DVDs for free for a lot of families that are low income. I mean, that's a huge resource in our cities.
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah, props to librarians. Yeah, I mean, like I like my like growth into like the weird film mutant that I'm today has like without a doubt couldn't be possible without like a public library. I grew up in Florida,
Yes.
and like the enormous DVD collection that they had of things that I couldn't get access to anywhere else, like, was insane. And I ended up meeting the librarian one day, and I was like, like, who picks the movie? And she's like, I pick all the movie. And I'm like, you do a really good job. And she's like, thank you. And that was the extent of our conversation. But I was just like, oh, this is a cool curator. This person has this. Like a lot of this stuff, which I just couldn't find anywhere else. But also, like, yeah, so many things that are so difficult to find, even on like out of print stuff.
Yeah.
Like, try to get connections to people. I would like kind of like people who had university connections. I would like say, hey, could you take out this movie? I think they have a copy of this, and you just have to ask them, and I'll give it back. And then like the price, what is it called? If you hold it for too long, they'll be like, they'll like give it back to me within like 2 days, and I'm like, okay. You know? So yeah, I agree. Streaming is very important, and I think especially to us who are like, I don't know, access minded and really care about the importance of making sure that films stay a constant topic of discussion. If you just talk about something which is not accessible to the wider audience, even at like a click, if you can click through something, right, even if it's not the best copy, I do think it is very, very important. And like these are repositories for film. And distribution is a very complicated, very like ever expanding realm. These are not film streaming companies are not archives. YouTube, not necessarily, not an archive. Netflix, not an archive. They may build up an archive one day, which I think we should do. But like, I think it's a careful balance where I think it's really important to make sure that we support the companies who are trying to give us indefinite access to things that we care about and the types of programming and types of materials that we care about. But also supporting the streaming companies for like putting exploitation and
right,
like low budget horror on their sites too. Yeah, Tubi does a great job. Shudder, like all these things. I shouldn't plug them too much because but yeah. But nonetheless, I think like advocating for programming is also really important for sure. I'm
Well,
not.
and that's maybe a counterpoint to streaming. I think one of the things that we've lost in this realm is which these home video labels still kind of technically have. We don't have that that long-haired hippie at the video store anymore saying, "Hey kid, you like that one? You'll like these five," or
Yeah.
something. So it's the algorithms aren't quite the same thing. But when you have David Gregory going, I want to put as many video nasties as I can out just so everybody can see them, or Joe Rubin shouting for sex films, or people at any of these other companies going, I watched this when I was 11 and nobody else in the world has seen it, so I want to show you and just share this love with the world. That's the kind of thing that's making these just exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think like both of those are very good examples. I think definitely listen to either of them, and especially support these ambitious sets. The Emmanuel set, the Severin did very cool shit. Um, like these enormous sets take an enormous amount of work and sifting through like so many different like types of elements. But I think a good thing about those kinds of sets is that they start element first too. Like we definitely start very much element up. If we find four cool things, we're like, what if we put them together and we find the other three? It's a whole connecting jigsaw puzzle where it's like, I don't know. I think that type of curation is really interesting to me. I was once talking to Rob. I was in a car with Rob Stone at the library. Rob Stone of the Library of Congress? He's the curator for it, and I didn't exactly know his title yet. But I was also with two other archivists who were George Wallman and John Snelson, and I started raging against curators because I'm just like, on anything without any care about the elements. And then I think eventually he was like, yeah, true. Yeah. And then later on, I was just like, when he was like, yeah, what as a curator, I'm like, oh fuck, no, I didn't mean you. But like, also advocate for curators who care about the film materials like him, and building up these sets, like especially if they're people who like actually care about finding stuff and preserving stuff which you've never seen or would never think being possible on like an actual release. That's really, really big. These box sets are really like expensive to make and take so much time. And I think a lot of the self-sacrifice that goes into them, from these curators into finding elements, emailing constant people, calling people who don't respond, and then finding their Facebook or finding their fucking like whatever. Like that's an enormous amount of personal like value expense that I think always goes into these enormous releases. So yeah, support people who do these big things. Like support any releases, obviously, even if it's streaming or whatever. But like definitely advocate for people who try to find new cool stuff and the best possible materials. So yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah.
Final question to really try to bring this in for a landing here. One thing I'm always interested in some of these fields, and it's especially true for this one because this is kind of an ancient field. It's not like we're creating new types of film nowadays. We're not branching off into ways to make nitrate work better for people in 2023. Are there emerging technologies in archiving and what you're doing? Are people still working to advance that? Because a lot of this we just sort of know through like advanced aging tests that it's probably going to be here for a good 30, 40 years. But after that, it's kind of a crapshoot. But are there studies and science actually being put into emerging technologies?
Yeah, you hit it. Yeah, that's a nerve right there. I think it's very tricky, man. I think there's a lot of emphasis currently on digital technologies and pulling more information from the film material itself. In terms of longevity of the film materials, like I'll always advocate for Image Permanence Institute, always in Rochester, New York, who did the AD strips. We love the AD strips. I think there's there. They do strict, but basically how we test the actual acidity levels and decomposition
Right.
levels of actual materials. They do really great work. I hope they continue advocating for film. Film is a really complex, multifaceted medium. Every single element needs. There's not a catch-all. You know, every type of material decays differently. Things with splices, different types of splices decay differently. And I think that largely poses a problem for making an actual, having institutions continue doing this kind of work, because we're now dealing with materials which, there's never going to be the perfect product, and the product that we make is going to be so limited to a specific subset, a specific
Right.
niche market, where I once tried to make a film core which would expand outwards, because a lot of times people would pop cores.
Yeah.
If you know, a core is this, where basically if you have one of these, they would pop the cores, because the cores were often seen as more valuable than specific types of elements, then toss the element, keep the core. So then oftentimes, we would find these elements with popped cores in very rare films. And so I wanted to very safely to remove the scratching possibility. I made an expanding core with my brother, who's a very experienced and brilliant engineer. And I think throughout the entire process, I think everybody just clowned on us. We were like, great job. Who are we going to market this to? like 10 archives in
Right.
America. So I think there's a very small market. I think a lot of one of my main hobbies is I look at a lot of the really useful studies and work and progress is actually done in other fields. So in medicine, plastics are really important. The actual, we're kind of in this really unique realm where basically industry is very much providing a great amount of resources into keeping materials alive, material longevity. So certain things which are known as warpage in our field, and in the field of plastics is called creep, and I think looking up little types of alternate fields, little scientific studies about how to keep things alive for longer and keep things from actually wearing the effects of time on them. That's very helpful, but sometimes you have to pull from other sources. I know someone reached out to us recently where he was, I think he's working with NYU. He's from NYU, but basically he found that a lot of mosquito netting was starting to smell like vinegar. And these are low budget mosquito nettings which were sent to Africa to keep malaria down. And he basically started looking up vinegar and the type of film or type of plastic. It's triacetate. So they used a very low budget plastic, and then suddenly these materials are off gassing the same as film. You find weird connections to larger fields. So just from that's they could pull from research that IPI did, Kodak did, all these other film companies, and try to determine what if there is a way of saving these materials, or do they just have to go to a more synthetic plastic instead of a semi-synthetic plastic? So it's very tricky. A lot of the resources are going into digitization, and I don't know. It's very, very tricky, very sad. But I feel if you know where to look, and you know what materials you're dealing with, and care about the very intricacies of I don't know, we're just dealing with plastics here. If you look into plastic science, it's one of the most well-funded, well-researched fields in the history of science and material sciences. So there's places to look, and there are people who are doing good work. So, I mean, a lot of the plastic people, good, good work. But the people who are interested in the film stuff, they're doing good work. I'll read whatever is of interest to me. If it's about triacetate or polyester or how adhesives break down over
Right.
time. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to. It's such a sad way to end the conversation. Where I'm just, oh fuck, you got to look at other fucking fields largely to get interesting insights. But I guess it's the truth of the whole thing. I guess.
Well, then I'll do one more speaking out into existence, the same way that you alluded to earlier. I would love to see some of these companies be much more transparent, not just like on the back of their cases, but when you're announcing these films, tell us the format, tell us where it came from, tell us when it was done, and tell us where you're storing these films, what you're doing to actually advocate for archival of film. I think that's a good call out, a good way for us to press the industry in a different direction for 2024 and see what we can do to improve.
I love it. I fully support. Yeah, I'll definitely do my part to I don't know make as much transparency as a bigger part of our mission. I mean, we're really trying here to make sure that people know what we're doing because I think a lot of this is we're dealing with stories here, and there are a lot of stories behind every single element. And sometimes if there's that weird moment where you're talking about how difficult it is to Curtis does the conforming for A/B roll. It's a really complicated process. I feel like a whole documentary could just be done on how time consuming his work is and how much thankless work that he does. People just think it's scanning something. No. Brandon who does the scanning, brilliant person. I'll always say it, but a lot of things need to be scanned, and then the post is enormous. So more transparency is always big, and I'll make sure that we're always going to be as clear as humanly possible, and I think challenging everybody else. Once again, make sure you keep the people who are producing and releasing these films from obscuring too much. Ask questions.
Yep.
If you care about preservation, you care about making sure that we're doing the best possible job humanly possible. Make sure we're finding the best elements. Make sure we're treating the actual film rights owners correctly. There was such a long period of time too where people would just rip people's work, take people's work, or even cutting out copyright notices was an enormous fucking facet of this, the industry, the industry of film distribution. Make sure that the people that you're supporting are caring about both people who made the films and the films itself. I think if that is any takeaway from this, I think that's a good one. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. Thank you for all that you do. I'm sure that it's not shared with you enough. The amount of work that people have put into these films that you're doing your job to save is immensely important throughout history and time. And it's depressing to think about how many that we've already lost, but it's also inspiring to think about how many just you personally can save. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you as well. Because again, I think you also do a really great job of informing the actual viewing public, and you raise people to a platform who are really, really doing really, really good work. I was perusing a lot of the interviews yesterday, and I was kind of blown away by the wide gamut. It's not just horror, it's not just exploitation. You obviously care about film. So thank you for what you do. I very, very much appreciate it. So
thanks, Oscar. Hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me know and I'll ramble. I always like to ramble about plastics. Yeah.
Thank you for watching The Disconnected. On the way out, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you've liked the video, and that you've copied the link to be able to share with someone else that may appreciate this.